Okay, we're live. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the fourth session of the day. So during the Grand Multiliteracy event, we talk a lot about literacy in the home language. But for many of us, we have more than one language at home. It can have different scripts. And several parents have asked me how to successfully manage teaching our children to read and write in more than one language, especially when there are different scripts. So that's my case. That's the case of our guest today, who is Tetsu Young. He is raising his four children with five languages. So, oops, sorry, five languages. So he has to juggle quite a few languages. There is Chinese, Japanese, French, Spanish, and
The one we're
which
speaking right now.
English. Yeah, English. Yeah. So five languages. And so we are going to talk about how we do it. Where we have prepared some topics to talk about, but feel free to jump in the comments to ask your questions so we can clarify how we do it. Tetsu, before we start, do you want to? Yeah. One thing I need to say before you introduce yourself is that so you're offering your ebook as part of the giveaways. So if you want to win it, you need to enter the giveaway. The links are in the description. Do you want to give us to talk a bit about the book before you introduce yourself?
All right, sure. I mean, it's not like the Bible or anything. It's just a little book that I wrote about how I grew up. This is actually before my children. It's how I grew up and how I'm using different ideas about how my experience growing up, and I put it into seven different categories. So I call it seven ideas to raise a polyglot like me. So it's just a simple read. It's an ebook, and it's on Amazon. So the actual title is Pampers to Polyglot, and then the subtitle is Seven Ideas on How to Raise Polyglots like me. So.
Yeah, thank you very much. And so Tetsu, you're a father, husband, entrepreneur. You have your company, and that's a global pharmaceutical company. And you have children who are between 4 and 12 now.
You
Yeah.
did your research.
And you're raising them with five languages.
Indeed.
Um, is there anything else you want to add to introduce yourself or your yeah.
Uh, no, I think you've covered it pretty well. Yeah, I don't work in the language industry. I
But
actually
you
use my
yeah.
languages to a very high degree, I think, and which is what really convinced me that this is something I want to pass on to my children. So I have been raising them in five languages ever since they were born. Like the planning was, well before one of them my first one was born. So even when my first son was in my wife's tummy, I was speaking to him in Mandarin to the tummy. So
Yeah.
so yeah, it's a process that the earlier you start, the better it is, I guess. That's my philosophy. So I've been starting before they were born and continues to this day. I've set up a good infrastructure for them to learn, acquire these five languages.
Yeah. I think it's good that you said acquire as well, because it's not
Indeed.
that we teach them just like in class, but we set up
Mhm.
the scene so that they can pick up the languages. And
Yes.
just for those of the people who are following us who don't know us, do you want to explain how, so we both use the OPOR method, so one parent, one language, but you have five languages and or two parents. So if you want to explain how you do that.
Yes. So just to reiterate, we do five languages. That's English, French, Japanese, Mandarin, and Spanish. So um, first of all, I am half Taiwanese, half Japanese. So I grew up in Taiwan until I was about 13. And I've spoken Mandarin up to that point on a daily basis. And that's a language that has stuck with me my whole life. And I also have Japanese, which I spoke with my mother my whole life. And then whenever I go to Japan, I use Japanese, of course. So here in our family, my wife is Japanese. My parents also live in the house. And with that context, we live in Quebec. where French is spoken. So I speak Mandarin to the kids. My wife speaks Japanese to the kids. Also, grandpa, Taiwanese, speaks Mandarin to the kids. Grandma, Japanese, speaks Japanese to the kids. And then when they leave the house, it's French everywhere here. So they go to school in French and all their activities are in French. We do have some friends who are Anglophones, but it's for English, it's really bits and pieces. It's these communications outside of house. Sometimes, whether it's a skating coach or they're a horseback riding coach, we try to find little bits and pieces where we could have English, but it's not a very structured thing. And other than that, they watch YouTube, they're online all the time, and that's where they get most of their input in English. And finally, our fifth language is Spanish. And this is another one that, it is, after all, a nice to have in our family to a certain degree, but it is a very nice to have, I think, if we live in North America. It is one of the biggest languages spoken in the world. So we are passing that on through au pairs, which are basically live-in nannies. In Europe, I think most people know the term au pair, but in North
Yeah.
America, it's not so popular. People are always like,
Oh,
"What's an
okay.
au pair?" And I always have to explain it's a live-in nanny.
Yeah.
And we bring them in usually from Mexico, and they would speak Spanish exclusively to the kids. And we as parents, we all speak to them in English. So they want to learn English or French. Sometimes French, they have a basic French and they want to do some activities here and learn French also. So
Yeah.
so
Thank
there
you.
you go. Those are the five languages. Very roughly we split them into the different people. Just because I speak those languages doesn't mean I'm going to speak to them in English or French or
Yeah.
Japanese. Sometimes it depends on the people who are around us in that conversation, but those are more exceptions than the rule. Whenever we speak directly one to one, it'll be in Mandarin.
Yeah.
And
And is so Mandarin, if I remember well, it's not your most fluent language, is it?
No, it's my fourth, I would say. In terms of fluency, I would say it's a fourth. Um, just because, I left Taiwan at 13.
Yeah.
I mean, any kid at 13 has a fluency in terms of native
Yeah.
accent and native, the natural way of speaking, but it's that vocabulary. Obviously, it's not at a very high level. So that's where I am. But at 13, so my oldest will be 13 in 2025.
Yeah.
So although he never lived in Taiwan, well, he did live in Taiwan for 1.5 years. But
Oh, okay.
otherwise, it's not like me. I spent 13 years in Taiwan, growing up, 24/7 in a Mandarin environment.
Yeah.
But his Mandarin is really good. I wouldn't say it's a 13-year or 12-year-old standard, but good enough to, if we drop him in Taiwan, he'll be able to find his way home and
Yeah.
yeah. So
Thank you. And so on my end, so less languages to juggle with. So I guess we have less people to rely on. But so I pass on French. My wife passes on Korean,
mhm,
and but everything around is in English. So
mhm,
we didn't go to the extent of trying to find coaches who could teach them something in French or Korean. But we have some friends for Korean who have children who have children of the same age as our children. So it helps as well, even if between them they speak in English, to normalize the fact that with parents we speak the home language,
mhm.
and between friends they can speak in English. Yeah, so yeah, but so then we're here to talk about multilingual literacy. So your children can also read and write in all their languages. I guess maybe not the 4-year-old, but
Yeah, to various degrees, I would say. Now, so obviously they go to school in French, so their first, let's say, educated language is French. But their English, despite the fact that we don't have any formal structured, process to for English input, their English is very strong. I guess it's just because they like it a lot, and all their exposure online is in English. So their English is basically, I would say, age standardized native level English, which was quite surprising to me. I thought
Yeah.
it would be French, but I think their English is actually stronger than their French in at least the spoken,
Oh,
or
wow.
at least equivalent. Um, and then Spanish. So these are the three that's using Roman, the alphabet. Um,
Yeah.
in terms of Spanish, I think my daughter probably has a higher level of Spanish in terms of reading, just because she loves reading.
Yeah.
My boys, I don't know. I wasn't a big reader when I was a kid, and I don't expect my boys to be avid readers either. But my daughter, it's just surprising. She can just devour books, one after another. So I think in that sense, maybe she has a higher vocabulary, maybe. But like I said, Spanish is just a nice to have in our home. So we have our au pairs, read them books, and past au pairs we're still in contact with. Sometimes, we hire them as tutors online because the kids are very familiar with them
Yeah.
already. So there's already that bond, which we've not talked about, but I think that bond is very, very important for children's acquisition for languages, especially for things that are what would I say, not so fun to do, like exercises, drills, and whatnot. So when you
Yeah.
have somebody that they love to be with, then it's easier, to
Yeah.
accept that, okay, with Mena, or with Diana, we want to do some grammar, but lots of games and whatnot. So that's how we keep their literacy up in Spanish. So now we get into more of the difficult ones. So from the North American perspective,
Yeah.
the first one is Japanese. So for both Japanese and Mandarin, what we do every summer is we go to Japan. We go to Japan and Taiwan from end of April, approximately, to end of August. So this is 2 months, 4 months, but 2 months in Japan and then 2 months in Taiwan. This is something we had been doing since my kids. Well, we actually all came back from Taiwan where in 2015. Everybody was here. My oldest was 3 at the time. And then 2016, 17, 18, 19, throughout all the way to when COVID hit, every summer that's what we did. We went to Japan and Taiwan 2 months each, uh, more or less, and then they would come back here for September for the new school year. So we
Yeah.
cut short the end of the year, but we start the new year here in September. And during those months, they would go to the local school in Japan. They just go to the local daycare or the elementary school. They learn just like any other kid there. The first few weeks they will struggle like hell, but then they catch up. It's quite amazing how quickly they catch up because after all, second grade, third grade, fourth grade, it's not rocket science, right? So
Yeah.
they do a few weeks, they will struggle, but then they catch up. And oftentimes before the end of the summer, there are times, especially like my daughter, she's a nerd. She would like teachers would give us feedback saying she's actually one of the strongest in the class for the
Oh,
kanjis. So
really?
that
Wow.
all these are very, very surprising things for me, but not my
Okay.
boys. My boys not so strong because they're just not academically as quite as strong, I think, which is
Uh,
fine, because I always
yeah.
tell the teachers right off the bat, we don't expect them to be, not only just age and standardized level. It's very hard. They're only there for a few months of the year. So it doesn't even have to be age standardized. The most important thing that I tell the teachers is we want them to be able to assimilate, get into the social circles, make
Yeah.
friends. That is much more important for me. Make friends that will last your lifetime, you know.
Yeah.
And the rest, just have fun, speak Japanese, be able to, integrate
Yeah.
using that language, and that the rest will is not is icing on the cake.
Mhm.
Okay.
And
So,
I think, yeah, sorry.
yeah. So I was trying to say that Japanese from that perspective is actually, going pretty well. Uh, Mandarin, on the other hand,
Right.
ever since COVID
Mm.
hit, uh, there were 4 years that we did not go to Taiwan. We were able to go to Japan. The kids have Japanese citizenship, and it's easier, even, with various restrictions, they were able to go to Japan. Um, Oh, and also instead of 2 months in Japan, 2 months in Taiwan, they would spend like 4 months in Japan. That
Yeah,
also, sort of
helped. Yeah,
debalanced the Japanese to Mandarin ratio. So we tried various things. We even brought in au pairs from Taiwan also, but Mandarin is just, I just think it's a harder language to master, both spoken and written or reading. So their level is not quite that high, especially in the reading and writing. And I've come to accept that it's okay. It's
yeah,
okay. Uh, Japanese, as long as they can get to a very high level in Japanese, it's already a win.
yeah,
Um, so so Mandarin, we do what we can. We put some stuff, posters in the house, stickers, on the fridge, and writing. It's a, you know, 冰箱, the refrigerator. That
right.
kind of stuff. We had our au pairs help them. We do what we can, and we take what
Yeah,
we can, and that's pretty much it for Mandarin. And since COVID hit, yeah, we've only gone once. And this year, this year we didn't go. I think we're kind of focusing more on Japanese and just trying to maintain whatever we can for Mandarin. That's where we're at in terms of Mandarin.
yeah.
So so there you
And
go,
so
the
we,
five
we're going
languages.
we're going to talk a bit more about the balancing part,
Yep,
but
yep.
also I wanted to remind to tell everyone that you have a YouTube channel where you talk more in details about all the things you do with your children
Yes,
that is called Raising Global Kids as Tetsu.
yes. Thank
And
you.
here, what we can see a lot is how much you use their interest to help them develop whether it's
Yes,
their languages or any skills. So you don't necessarily focus just on just a language, but anything
yeah,
they love, they can learn through interest.
that's right.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I try to really let my audience know that the most important thing when trying to teach your kids, whether it's languages or any other skill, because language is just, after all, it's one of the skills.
yeah,
Uh, so I try to let people know that the most important thing then that I treasure and that I take the most effort in trying to maintain is a good, trusting relationship with your kids.
mm,
Um, it's important to treat them, with respect and as an individual being, and take their interests, uh, even within their maturity, take it seriously. Let them know that we care about what they like, what they don't like, and talk through many of the things. We actually take time. I actually block off time on my calendar where we sit down every few weeks, sit down and talk about, it's like a one-one at the office, with your boss. Like, that's where I took my inspiration, actually, with my colleagues at my job. So I take that time, I sit down, and we talk about various things, how's your hockey, how's school, and what do you want to become when you grow up, and this kind of things. We start at age 8.
yeah,
That's where they don't understand the world, but they are able to have a conversation, maintain a conversation. And that's where, once again, I like to emphasize the word habit. You develop a habit of talking. You develop a habit of exchanging ideas. You develop a habit of trusting. All that, is something you build. I'm not waiting till their teenage years where they're going to rebel against me before I
yeah,
stause this, right? I
yeah. We
want them
need
to.
this bond before.
Yeah, exactly. So that I'm, it's preventative, uh, because there's just too many horror stories, about kids not listening and rebelling against the parents.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to be a step ahead, hoping that when they actually get into those years, that we'll still have this habit of talking and making sure that's a safe time, safe space,
Yeah.
and they can open up and say anything to daddy and mommy. And it goes both ways. There are times, they are allowed to let us know what they don't like, about what we do. And I also take those times sometimes to apologize for being too harsh on
Yeah.
them for this or that. I try to find things, where I could show my vulnerability and exchange.
Yeah.
You cannot be fake in these things, but there are moments where
Be honest about it.
yeah, but I know that there are moments where my pride does not allow me to apologize on the spot.
Have the same.
Yeah, I just can't do it, but I still want them to know that, so there's things that I regret saying,
Yeah.
but we'll say it at a different moment where it's, made for that. And I
Yeah.
don't, jump on them whenever they do something stupid, like all the time. You know, different levels. I try to like maybe just keep them for that time so that
Yeah.
I could compile all the good things. I try to always remember all the good things that they've done. They help out in the
Ah,
house,
nice.
all the positives, and then a few negatives. Make sure that, it's not just a scolding session, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's always important, they say three good things for one bad thing. Try to get that
Ah,
ratio down
okay.
as much as possible.
Yeah.
Um, it is what it is. It's I've been doing this for a few years now. My third child will turn 8 this year, so
Ah,
and also, this is a good moment to talk about, like I said, careers and things like that. And when they're 8, they want to be an astronaut, they want to be this or they want to be that, architect. But you see that progression as time goes on. They want to be a
mm,
professional hockey player and things like that. Uh, and it's okay, whatever it is, you listen to it, you respect it, and then
yeah.
slowly you add in different things over time. It's the same topics that come back more, time and time again. But oh, and obviously this is all done in Mandarin, right? So and then time and time again, the same things come over and over, but there's different layers that get added on, right? Oh, you want to be an architect, how to become, what you need to study to become an architect. How many architects are there in the world? What are the, you know, salaries of an architect? What do you expect?
Ah,
Things
yeah.
like that. Things. Money is also something we talk about. It's no big taboo. It's something I think all schools should teach finance
Yeah.
to kids, but I'm not waiting for the schools to do that for me. They already know about compound interest and things like that. Especially my boy, I guess. My oldest Ronnie, he's very good with that, with math, and he's very good with that kind of thinking.
Mm,
And career wise, also, I think I talked to him about, competitive advantage, the market, what's your skill worth in a market.
ah, wow.
Languages are something that, that's very hard to acquire, that you have it now. If you go into that route, you can do this, you can do that, you can travel the world. Yeah,
Mhm.
that
Then, yeah.
all
We
these
we
things,
try to, sorry. I
yeah,
was
no,
going to say as well. Sorry.
go
Go
ahead, go
ahead.
ahead.
I was going to say we try to keep time as well with our sons. We don't do like you talk, like have a set moment every week. But we have some like movie night or game night, but
Mhm.
where we spend time one to one, it's like on a monthly basis. So actually it's every 2 months because each month we have like a parent-child date day.
Okay.
So the first weekend, like one of us goes with one child and the other goes with the other child, and we
Okay.
spend the day doing whatever fun thing they want to do, or we decide on a fun thing to do. But it's a good time to talk about just one to one about various things.
Yeah.
And sorry, I wanted to ask you because one of the questions I got a lot was regarding resources. So
Yep.
it's more easy to get resources in one language than the other, for example.
Yes.
Um,
Absolutely.
and but actually, before we talk about resources, maybe it's good to talk about one thing that there were a lot of parents who were stressing about is balancing these languages. So
Mhm.
whether it's spoken or writing and reading, so how do we balance languages? I talked a bit about it yesterday in my session, but do you want to start to say how
Sure.
you take this balancing languages?
Yeah. Uh, for to balance the level of obviously we would all like to have all the languages at the highest level at the age standardized level, but it's simply not realistic if you really think about it,
Yeah,
especially when it comes from the external factors like the parents trying to put it in. If the kid has tremendous interest in languages, that's a different thing. But my kids are not. I think they're very normal kids in that they don't love languages. I'm just thankful they don't hate languages. So at least there's that. So I try to build an environment where they would use these languages naturally, in a compelling way. They have to speak Spanish to the au pair, the caretaker, that kind of thing. To make that situation, just create the situation, create the environment for them, and the rest, just let nature take its course. And from that, we've as I mentioned it briefly earlier, I've really come to see that Mandarin is a tough language to learn if you're not in
this
in that
environment.
environment 24/7. And I can't say, I spent so much time with my kids in Mandarin. Uh, I try my best, but it's not hours and hours every day, and you actually need hours and hours. You need massive input in order to really master a language. So from that perspective, we've come to see that the different languages have different levels of the different levels that they can achieve.
Yeah,
And Mandarin is probably the weakest of the five. Japanese is not too bad. It's actually really good. They speak like any normal Japanese kid, and they can read to a fairly good level,
yeah,
especially my daughter. And of the four language skills, I don't know if that's what they're called, but
yeah.
speaking, listening,
Reading and
reading,
writing.
and writing. My sort of rule of thumb is input. The listening is the most important for us. So we put, let's say, 40% on that, 30% on speaking, 20% on reading, and then 10% on writing. So
Mhm,
writing,
okay.
by default becomes the lowest priority.
Yeah,
We do what we can, but we don't break our backs to make sure they can write to a very high level. And why I say that, because reading and writing, especially writing, it's more of an intellectual activity, whereas listening and speaking is, I feel, is more of a natural activity
yeah.
that's based
You
on
communicate with
practice.
people and
Yeah, it's more a natural process. So I believe that speaking and listening and speaking is much better to do when you're young, when you learn all the right pronunciations and the right natural way of syntax, or word order and things like that. Whereas it's much more difficult to learn as an adult to
yeah,
speak without an accent, or speaking very naturally. So we try to input as much as possible at this part when they're young, but the reading and writing, well, first of all, you take a certain level of linguistic skills before you can actually start to read. You need that base. So you have
yeah,
to get to at least 4, 5, 6 year old before you actually start. And to
yeah.
get it to a very high level, it's a lifelong commitment that, I just don't feel there's that big of a pressure.
Mm.
And especially in terms of writing, it's not so essential in today's day and age. If you can read, if you can read to a very high level, which my kids do, at least in Japanese, and to a certain degree in Mandarin, then you can always type it out. That's how I,
Yeah,
learned. When I can't write to this day, I cannot write with my hand.
The
but I
Chinese
can type.
characters.
And I've been working, for more than 20 years in Japan, using Japanese, and also Mandarin. I can type Mandarin.
Yeah,
So if you can read, you can type it out.
yeah,
And
because then
that's
it's just
pretty
about
much,
recognition.
it's about recognition. Yes. And it's funny because people ask me, well, if you can read, why can't you write? People think in the Roman alphabet way of thinking.
Yeah,
But I always say, I can recognize your face, but I can't draw it out.
yeah,
Right? It's really a matter, it's a difference between being able to recognize and being able to write it.
yeah,
And so yeah, I can read perfectly, but I
yeah.
just
So
I just cannot write.
I think it's important to realize that it's not that we don't need to get all the skills really high. We need to see what's going to be useful for our children. What
Hmm.
exists, like you talked about technology, you can type. Like
Hmm.
now, even in the Latin alphabet, we have Grammarly and things like that
Yeah.
can correct us.
Hmm.
So it might not be perfect, or at least not yet. But there is
Exactly.
help. Yeah. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
we
And
have
you have,
one, sorry.
no, I was gonna say it's building that base, that foundation when they're a kid. Because who knows, maybe they'll never use Mandarin in their life
Yeah.
after
Yeah.
they grow up. But if they want to, they already have a very solid base upon which they can build very quickly. Like I mentioned, before we got on, people ask me which is more difficult, Mandarin or Japanese, and I always say Mandarin. Just because I think that the pronunciation is very difficult, and also the kanjis, that the Chinese characters are also very difficult. So that's how intuitively I always say that Mandarin is much more difficult. But I have a friend who was a French guy, and he studied these two languages, to very high levels. And he said it depends. It depends on which level we were talking about. Japanese is much easier to initiate because the pronunciation is very simple. The vocabulary at the beginning is quite simple,
Yeah.
and so you can enter Japanese and get to some sort of a conversation relatively quickly. Whereas Mandarin, it's much harder to initiate. It's much harder to start because you get overwhelmed with the pronunciation. You get overwhelmed with the Chinese characters, uh, and uh, and then he says, on the other hand, once you get the bases down, you can expand quite quickly in Mandarin. If you get the basics down,
Yeah.
the grammar is not very hard. So you can apply the same patterns over and over, and you'll be able to build vocabulary quite quickly. Whereas Japanese, it's much harder from the intermediate to an advanced level because of different levels of politeness, and there's various
Yeah.
formats of grammar that's quite complex. Each Chinese character can be pronounced like a gazillion ways. All these factors come into play, and makes Japanese a daunting task to bring from the beginner intermediate level and beyond. And
Yeah.
yeah, I've noticed that, and when he told me that, I thought, wow, that sounds totally logical.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so coming back to the kids, they already have a solid foundation in both, and if they want to expand from there, you know it'll be
Yeah.
much quicker than somebody starting from zero.
And I always think as well when it comes to balancing languages that we shouldn't just see it as like a picture that's taken now, but more on the long term. So, for example, like like a child can be better. For example, my sons could be better at French now because maybe they read more comic books, etc. But then we spend a month in Korea, and then the interest and they read more in Korean, so they're in an environment that boosts their Korean. So it's not always at the same level, but I see my job as trying to find opportunities for them to want to explore these languages more. And that's how we started like the movie night and things like that, so that we can watch, for example, films in French and then talk about it, and they have the vocabulary to
Hmm.
talk about it.
Sharing, yes.
Yeah. And we have a question from Daniel, who's
Wow.
following us, who is saying that so research shows that it's more difficult to maintain a heritage language with the second child especially when they are going to school and they bring the school language back home. Have you observed that in your with your children? On my part, I'm going to say no, but mainly, but I think it's due to the difference in personalities, because my eldest is a lot more approximative. So if he speaks to you, and even if it's not perfect, he doesn't mind as long as you understand, he's fine with it. My youngest, he pays attention to the details and he wants to get things right. So it doesn't stop him from, like, for example, he doesn't get stressed and not speak. He speaks, and but he when we say we repeat in the right way, he's going to remember it a lot quicker than his older brother. So I think in terms of maintaining the heritage language, my second child is a lot more motivated by that than the eldest, who is a bit relaxed. And
Mhm.
yeah, how about you?
That's good. Yeah, well, definitely, like you say, different kids have different personalities, and I've got four, and all four of them are quite different. Um, and they also acquire languages at different time points in their development. My first son and my last child, my daughter, uh, started to speak at about 18, 6, 17, 18 months or so. I mean, to make, a coherent sentence, at least string together maybe 3 to 5 words. So I think that's relatively quick, but I think there are kids who start at 12 months. But
Yeah.
in our fourth, these two are quicker. But my daughter, my older daughter, so she's the second child, she took all the way to almost 5 years old before she could string together, full
Oh,
sentences. And and that's where for the first time in my this program that I have for myself that I'm so convinced is the best for my children. That was the first and the only time that shook my confidence. Like maybe what the other people were saying were right. It's that you cannot give them so many languages, and maybe it'll cause a irreparable damage, to their language acquisition. And then I did go see a speech pathologist,
hmm.
and all she said was, you're giving her 5 languages. Obviously it's going to be a burden. You should just focus on French.
Yeah.
Like, okay. But 2, 3 weeks after that, like this is, I don't know
Oh,
if it's a coincidence. I mean, 2, 3 weeks after that, her vocabulary just exploded. I don't know what happened, just like a trigger, and then she just caught up, and like I said, she's an avid reader, so her vocabulary just went through the roof, and she's a very strong student at school because she's very serious and she's dedicated, diligent. My oldest is kind of like your oldest, just kind of fluffy. He's very quick to learn things, but he's just not very serious.
oh, same.
So he makes stupid mistakes. Not that he doesn't understand. Oftentimes he makes stupid mistakes. He catches things. He's probably the fastest to catch things, understand, learn to a certain degree very, very quickly. But he doesn't have that perseverance that my daughter has. Step by step,
Yeah.
day by day, just build. My daughter's no genius by any stretch of the imagination, but she is diligent. Just build, 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 pump,
It's
pump,
like you're
pump.
describing my sons.
Yeah, maybe it's a second child syndrome.
Yeah.
Uh, but they do well, and I just try to balance out different activities to stretch their strengths, make that
Yeah.
their development stepping stone, I guess.
But I guess
Um,
to answer Daniel, it's like from our personal experiences, it's more, it depends on the personality of the child.
yes, absolutely, absolutely. But I'm not gonna hide. Every child gets less and less attention, just by the fact
Yeah,
that we
this
have
is right.
24 hours a day, and it's got to be, when it's divided up to one child, and then now it's divided to two children, and then three, four. The fourth one obviously has has less of an attention. Um,
But that's why it's good that to dedicate some time when we know we're going to spend time with that child.
yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, especially when we have
But
several children.
yeah, but what we can do, what we have done before also, is to have the older children teach the younger children,
Ah,
sort of
yeah, yeah, yeah.
replaces. That's good for both, like the teacher and the student. We do that and becomes, certain activities in the day. Like my older daughter loves reading, so it's not so much of a chore for her to read to the youngest,
Yeah.
things like that, right?
And so, because I see the time passing, there was
My
another
goodness.
question.
Are you
I,
serious? Oh
we
my
have
God.
15 minutes
Oh, wow. Okay.
left. Yeah, 15 minutes left.
Yeah.
A bit more, 20. But yeah, so one of the other big questions I had is about resources. So how to say, the amount of resources we can have access to is going to make it easy or more difficult. So it can have an impact on how much um, they can develop their reading and writing. What do you do in terms of resources? Or what do you get and what do you do with that?
Yeah. Well, here we start, always with the children's interest in mind. I don't say, we don't we do some, let's say we hire a teacher on italki. That's a
The
tutoring
platform, yeah.
platform. Uh, we we tell the teacher not to just focus on grammar, teach them, pound grammar into their heads, but some grammar is good, maybe 15 minutes of grammar, but the rest is mostly about playing games, whether it's Roblox or, Minecraft or that kind of stuff that my kids love. Through that, they have a conversation and they learn Mandarin or Japanese, whatever it is. The resource that we want to use, we try to think first is, does it incite an, interest with our
Yeah,
kids? And then because that makes it durable, sustainable. Like we've been doing, italki since 2020. Like, it was an idea that came up through because of the pandemic, but it turned out to be a fantastic idea that continues to this day. My kids are fighting each other to have that teacher to do the italki lessons. I mean, we sometimes when it's during the vacation time, it's like every day, and then they'll have their
because
turns.
also
Like, today's my
they do it in
turn.
the morning, no? Like
They
they
do it in the
wake up
morning.
earlier to do.
Yes, it's like one stone, many birds. It's impossible to wake my kids up for school, but if it's for this, bing, they'll get up and then they'll do their italki and then they'll have breakfast and then they'll leave. So, uh,
Also finding the motivation
yeah,
to.
yeah. So obviously there's resource constraints in terms of time and money. But we start with, what do we think is sustainable? What do we think is something that will keep them going? And especially, it's because even if they sit in front of the screen for an hour, if they're not interested, it's just not gonna, it's not a good investment, right? And I've mentioned earlier, we go to Japan and Taiwan every summer. Now we don't go to Taiwan anymore, but we do for Japan.
Yeah,
It's a big investment in terms of travel costs, but we think about overall balance. We do have a place to live over there, so that sort of saves on the living costs.
yeah.
School is free for elementary
Ah,
school for Japanese citizens, so they are citizens,
yeah,
so they can go in for a few months every year. So the real expense is that travel expense back
yeah.
to and back for the kids. But otherwise, it's not so bad, right?
Okay.
Um, that's like the biggest expense every year in terms of
Yeah, I can imagine. Poor
language program
children.
for the kids. Yeah. But besides that, these lessons on italki or we, like I mentioned, we hire our past au pairs for Spanish lessons, once again because they have a good bond with these people. They already know the teacher, they love the teacher. Then they're more receptive to everything that's being taught. All these things, the same hour is stretched much further
Yeah.
when you think about the strategy of how to use these resources, not just
Mm.
the resource in and of itself.
Yeah. So it's more about finding what's going to motivate them. So intrinsic motivation to
In, yes.
explore whatever resource there
Hmm.
is. And
Yeah.
like you said, like if they like the teacher, they might, even if it's they do a game or something that's not that interesting, they do a task that is not that interesting,
Mm.
they're going to maybe retain more and get
Yes.
more out of it
Yeah.
because they
Because
like
it's
the
that person.
with yeah,
Is that person.
yeah.
And then obviously, it's easier with my daughter, my older daughter who loves reading, then I just have to buy books and just put them in a room and she'll just devour them. There's also countless types of apps. There's no point in naming them, but there's just a gazillion of them. Just, if it's Chinese characters, there's a gazillion of them where you have to write and then, it teaches you the strokes and the lines and you have a score if you get it nicely, it's this many points. So gamification, obviously all the kids love that stuff, and you
Yeah,
just learn characters through that,
yeah.
right? Oh, and another one, we also ask grandpa from Japan to give them lessons, when they're there.
Ah,
Grandpa sits down, and goes through their homework with them, or they have if they're here, then it's through Zoom and
oh
grandpa will
wow.
sit down. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. 'Cause
Use
on
whatever you can, right? Whatever you can. Uh keeps
my
grandpa happy
end,
too.
yeah, to create this relationship, intergenerational relationship.
Yes.
And on my
Absolutely.
end, so I don't use a wide range of resources. The same, I'm looking for what's going to motivate them. So, I spend a lot of time trying to, a lot, not all the time, etc. But I spend time trying to find books that they're going to love. So, with the suggestions from friends who have children
Yeah.
from of the same age, or by going forums, or just by Googling things, by getting ideas of books they can love. And for French, I find things very easily on Amazon.
Hmm.
It can be more expensive than buying the English version sometimes, but
Hmm.
it's, and for Korean, it's a bit more tricky because of the shipping cost. We don't find it on Amazon, so there's a shipping cost, but we found a secondhand bookshop and we buy
Yeah.
loads of books
Well, there you
at the
go.
same time.
Yeah.
And then we don't give them everything at once. We just give them a few, then a few more, then a few more.
Okay.
So they can actually spend time like appreciating the books. And I guess when they were little, I did a lot more with writing through games, etc. So that's in my book. But now, because you're a bit more reluctant to spend time writing because it demands more effort than reading. So I left it a bit on the side when there is something like writing to grandpa or something or texting grandma, etc. They do it, but other than that, they don't really write. So I use these small bits of opportunities where they write to maybe like teach them something. So if it's a word they use all the time, I explain why it's spelled that way, etc. But other than that, I don't do much. But now that my first son is at secondary school, he's going to. So we talked about GCSE, so which is the exam they take at 16 years old, and he's going to take French. So with this, that's a motivation for him to work a bit more on his writing. So we're doing this so through my books again, but so he's writing things and like I'm not correcting everything. I go step by step, but yeah, there is a goal, so he's a bit more motivated. Yeah. And so
Fantastic.
we have another question,
Okay.
which is to go back on the siblings discussion we had.
Yep.
So she asked, can you talk about the sibling language preferences and
Ah, this is a good one.
peer group dominant language on a child? So I guess the influence on a
Yep.
child's
Hmm.
language
Yep.
acquisition
Yep.
and etc.?
Yes, that's a great question. Uh, and what I thought when I was, beginning this journey, my plan was, they're born, most of them were born in Japan, but we came back to Canada in Quebec, when my oldest was 3. And then we had, my second was 1.5. My third was born here. My fourth was born in Japan. And my thought was they're going to go to school in French. So eventually, they will probably speak in French amongst themselves.
Mm.
Even though when they were young, they always spoke Japanese amongst themselves. And that's, for me, it's a very simple explanation. It's mommy's language, right? It's the
Ah,
most, that's what I think,
yeah.
And and so they were their strongest language was and continues to be a very strong language, which is Japanese.
Mm.
But my oldest is now in secondary 1, and French has still not taken over in the
Oh,
family.
wow.
Well, it's their educated language. They're in French for most of the
Wow.
day, every day, but it's not French. It's actually English. For some reason, the kids
Mm.
speak English amongst themselves now since about 2 years ago, 1 to 2 years ago.
Wow.
And one big, yeah, total surprise for me, which is why, I'm saying that their English is like my daughter says, English is her first language. She goes as far as saying that. So they are, for all intents and purposes, native English speakers. Uh, and I think the biggest influence came from their cousin who lives next door, my brother's son. They're francophones, but they have a cousin who's anglophone, and they used to play with them all the time. So they love speaking English. English is like a cool language for them, I think.
Ah, I see.
So when they like in the family, they speak French. Like it's
Yeah.
their first language is still French. They have a little bit of an accent in English, but when they come here with my kids, they speak English. And like I said
Wow.
earlier, YouTube and all these, media input is English. So English eventually took over, and they're now, since a year or two, speaking English among themselves. Even my youngest, 4-year-old, feels strange
Wow.
for me to see them speak English, but I guess it doesn't for them. It's a language in which they can express themselves the best, I guess. And let them be. They speak English amongst themselves, and
It's
I
funny as
guess
well to see that they all do it because there could be some who maybe prefer English, some Japanese, but
yeah. Well,
yeah,
I mean, they spend so much time with amongst themselves.
yeah.
They have to have that language, that common language amongst themselves, right? It's like is another question that often comes up, and that didn't come up today, is that people ask me, if you speak other languages and they already know you can speak the other languages, why don't they, default to an easier language, whether it's English or French?
Yeah.
And I tell them the key is not whether they know you speak other languages or whether you actually speak other languages. The key is which language you decide to speak with your child, and you make that the communication language. You make that the habit that that you communicate in this language with your child. So that is the heart-to-heart language, and you build that as a habit when you grow up, which is why I also discourage people from switching different languages, because I can speak, 2 languages or 3 languages. Hey, I don't have to hire other people to do that. I can just teach the languages to my kids, right? No, I don't believe that. Well, it can be done, but it's a much more laborious process, and I don't think you can do it to a very high level for all 3. Just because the kid will, naturally prefer one language over another and eventually default to that language that he's most comfortable with, and potentially reject the other languages. So I didn't want to give my kids that choice. I'm not forcing them to speak Mandarin with me, but it feels very strange. It feels very weird for them to speak a different language to me. And that's exactly what you want to go for. You want to speak that language, Mandarin only to the kids, so that you develop this weird feeling if you speak a different language. Kind of like how I
Mm,
feel right now with them speaking English among themselves. If
'cause
it's like
with
it's
me,
weird.
it's been different. So for me, it always feels weird to speak English to them.
Yeah.
So
Hmm.
even when they are their friends, they're with their friends, when I speak in English, I look at their friends.
Hmm.
It's strange for me to look at them and speak in English. Sometimes I do it, but it's
Hmm.
really, really
Yeah,
bizarre for me. But
exactly.
for them, they don't seem to feel weird to talk to me in English. So
Okay.
they talk. So depending on when. So for example, if we just went to France, then they speak in French because they're in their environment. We'll come back as well. When we spend, but I feel like they speak more French when we do things together. So when it's daily stuff, they are going to go towards English very easily. But for example, this summer when we went camping with my son, we're speaking a lot in French. My second son spent the summer in Korea, but whenever we spoke, it was in French. And when he came back, I could see he was talking to me a lot about a lot of things, but it was a bit more difficult, but he
Hmm.
still made the effort. So I feel like for them, it's not weird to switch languages with me,
Okay.
but for me, it is. So I always speak to them in French. And when I feel that even when I speak in English to them just for fun or whatever, um, I get a stronger French accent
Okay.
somehow because I think it's because I feel weird about it. But yeah, so for them, but it goes back to what you said, the heart language. I
Hmm.
think we have connected in French together. So even if English is easier, when there is a time when they're happy and they want to express it or they feel happy to be with me, then they switch to French or it becomes French. So I don't know if they realize it or if it's just natural, but yeah,
Interesting, interesting. Yeah, yeah. This language refusal is a big problem in our community. So I always just try to think about, not how to fix the problem, which I don't have an answer for. It's very, very difficult when your child refuses to speak the target language. So I just think about how to avoid it ahead of time,
yeah.
to the extent I can. And so far, so good. My oldest is 12 and I'm done. My program for them is minimum 10 years old. And if I get to 12 years old, which is my stretch goal, I'm good, you know.
When you say
So
your goal or stretch goal, do you mean like in terms of language proficiency or
in terms
what
of
do you mean?
actively getting them to prioritize, languages. Well, prioritize, as in for me to make that serious effort for them to acquire these languages. From here, it's everything is just icing on the cake.
Okay, yeah.
You like
They have
my
solid
oldest
basics,
went,
so
yeah, exactly. He went to Japan every year until he was 10.
yeah.
My daughter, same thing, went to Japan this year, so last year. I mean, in terms of school, they'll go into the school
Yeah.
and do all that. And now we're in that zone for at least for my oldest. Like I've achieved my stretch goal for my oldest. From here, we'll continue to speak Mandarin, but I don't have to like think about all these different tools and resources to make him learn more Mandarin. If he wants to, obviously I'll support him, but
Yeah.
I'm focused on the three other younger ones. Well, even my daughter, she's reached 10, so my base case is
Yeah.
achieved. I'm going for the stretch case, to the extent that I can. But my younger two, we're still getting them to do the italki and all these different activities to get them to improve their languages at to the best of our abilities, which is the only thing we can do.
Yeah. Thank you very much. We're coming to the end of the hour. So we are going to wrap it up. But we talked about loads of things like parenting, about language speaking, but also reading and writing.
Mhm.
And just do you have a last message? So the topic was how to juggle our languages, especially when there are different scripts. Is there a
Yes.
final thought you want to share with everyone?
Yeah. I think I always try to make people sort of see things a little differently. It it's not an languages is not an academic, pursuit.
Yeah,
It's a communication tool. It's always good to use languages to complement whatever you do. Like I work in pharma, nothing to do with languages, but I use my languages every day as a tool because my clients are in Japan or they're in the US or all over the world. And so the key point is that communication, and I put so much emphasis on trying to make sure that my communication with my children is rock solid before anything else. And the rest flows. Always thinking about what they want, what they like, and how to stretch their strengths rather than hitting them on the head with
yeah,
their weaknesses. Um, you know, with balance, obviously. It's what I think is the best for their future. I would try to do, but
yeah,
always keeping them in that loop to make sure that they are open to whatever we let them do. And so far so good. Like I say, um, it, there's ups and downs in every child's life, but we're able to be there with them through the ups and downs for them to open up to us, whatever happens.
yeah,
And that is the most critical thing. And if it comes down to not acquiring the languages, so be it. But so like I
yeah,
said, so far so good. Language in and of itself may not be the first foremost um, goal in this relationship that we have with our children,
yeah. I think
but
that's
it has turned out to be very good so far.
yeah, it's really important. I think what you're saying that we need to, the priority is the relationship we have with our
Yes,
children. Then
yes,
languages, or whether it's reading or writing as well,
yes,
it comes after with it, or sometimes it doesn't come at the extent we wished originally. But yeah, but we need to favor, no, to
yeah.
prioritize the
The
relationship with our
relationship.
children.
And once you have that, they will be more open to whatever you put in front of them to do.
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
you can put all the effort you want, but if they don't want to do it, there's just it's almost like there's no point. If you force them to do it, they're not gonna like it. It's gonna backfire,
yeah,
and you're gonna hurt your relationship with your children. So if you first put the emphasis on the relationship, then whether it's languages or any other thing, it'll flow. It'll
yeah,
flow better. So that's what I think. And we've mentioned this at the beginning. Five languages. You know, whatever your reasons are, think about it. Think about why you're doing the five languages. Are there languages that are more important than the others? Then you can put more emphasis on that and not try to like get
yeah,
the best at at all the languages and be disappointed if you don't have age
yeah,
standardized level in every single one. It's not a realistic goal to set even
yeah,
for 2 3 languages, and 5 languages. It's We do it because we have a life context around
yeah,
4. Our fifth one is a nice to have. Spanish is a nice to have, but we don't have like the strict minimum that they must achieve for any of the languages other than English and French, which are because they live here, they have to study and they
yeah.
have to get to a high level for those two. But other than that, it's it's going well, but it's not a strict requirement.
Yeah. Thank you very much for these wise words and for sharing your
Uh,
experience with us. We're going to meet back in about 10 minutes, so 4:30 in England, to talk about what happens in the brain of multiliterate children. We have just the
wow.
last message from Namrata. Thank you very much. Rightly put, language is an academic endeavor, but a communication tool for children to express themselves and to communicate in different contexts and different places with people. Yeah. So
Absolutely.
thank you
Absolutely. We
very
must not
much.
lose sight. Yeah. Well,
Thank you.
thank you, Yoshito. This has been thoroughly enjoyable. And as usual, oh my God, when you get me talking about languages and time just sort of accelerates.
Yeah.
Yeah. But thank you
So
so much for
enjoy
this
the,
opportunity.
thank you for coming and enjoy the rest of your weekend.
Yep. Thank you so
Thank you.
much. And best of luck. Best of luck
Bye
to
and
all your
bye
endeavors.
everyone.